So employee voice is about employees having a say in the organisations. It can be a say over different types of issues, from concerns about their own working conditions or well-being to also making suggestions about organisation improvements or the governance of the organisation. So it's quite a wide definition. Traditionally, there's been two strands in the literature. One has been an economic argument around voice, which says it makes sense for businesses to involve employees in the daily running of the business because they've got ideas and contributions to make. They've got suggestions for improvement, they can report on errors and so on. So there's a kind of business case for employee voice. The second strand in the literature is around rights. So there's an argument that workers' rights shouldn't stop at the factory gates. Workers are citizens of the world, industrial citizens, and they should have rights within the workplace. So it's not just a matter of having good ideas for the organisation, it's a matter of being a fundamental right in terms of reflecting their human dignity in the workplace. So you see these two strands within the academic literature. In terms of forms, traditionally industrial relations scholars have looked at trade union as the main vehicle for voice because they represent workers, they have some power and some protection in the workplace in a way an individual doesn't. More recently, literature has looked at other types of worker vehicles for voice, from informal work, which is particularly looked at by organisational psychologists, just individuals speaking up, and also non-union forms of representation, and more recently looking at ways workers can be represented in the new economy. So the world of work has been changing. Of course, it's always been changing. But in a sense, a lot of our models of voice are based on traditional industries and the traditional economy. So we have structures and institutions based on, say, large organizations, public sector organizations and so on, where you've got a defined workforce in a defined area, and you can set up vehicles for voice, whether it be trade unions or consultative bodies or upward problem solving or quality circles and the like. The issue is that in the new world of work, a lot of work isn't like that. We've always had a lot of people in small firms where there haven't been those traditional structures of voice. But in addition, people work from home, people are in different locations and so on and so forth. It's very difficult to have that same collective voice in the way that existed before. So new vehicles for voice have to cope with the diversity of workers and the diversity of work structures. So we've also got to look at things like the platform economy and so on as well. And that takes us from employee voice to worker voice. That is, people who may not be employees but are still workers and still need to express their voice in terms of improving their conditions and so on. Well, it partly depends on, a lot depends on context. So trade unions have different levels of strength in different parts of the world. So it does depend on where we're looking. In some areas of the world, trade unions do not exist to a great degree, so we can't really look to them as being the vehicles for employee voice. So I think where unions do exist, they have that role to play. They're independent, they have a certain level of protection in a way that individual employees do not. They can articulate for a large group of workers. So they have an important democratic role to play in raising concerns and getting them dealt with and addressed and so on. But if we're looking at the future of voice, it can't just involve unions because they're just not on the ground in some places. And unions themselves are changing their views on other types of voice. Early on they were quite hostile, or in some cases they were hostile to direct forms of voice as being a challenge to the role that they played. I think they're now more receptive to how different forms of voice can interact and produce benefits for the workers, and trade unions can facilitate those other forms of voice and encourage people to get involved in those other forms of voice rather than ignore them. But undoubtedly there is a move to look at new forms of voice which don't involve unions, because the unions don't exist in these areas. We're seeing this particularly in the area of the platform economy, where we're seeing groups organize themselves. So there's an agency among workers. It's not just a matter of being given voice vehicles. They're taking up voice vehicles themselves and self-organizing through collective action, through using social media and e-voice, digital forms of voice and so on. And that's a kind of completely new area for a lot of the voice scholars to look into. We've tended to look at heavily institutional vehicles of voice, and this provides a completely new challenge for voice researchers.